Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jenny Beal, and this is the Living in Not Knowing section of the Awareness podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the philosopher and writer, Elizabeth Reninger. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello.
First, I'll tell you a little about Elizabeth's background. Since she was a young child, Elizabeth has felt a natural draw towards exploring, as the Sufis say, that which transpires behind that which appears. Along the way, this fascination inspired encounters with Buddhist, Taoist, Advaita Vedanta, and other non-dual traditions. Yoga, asana, qigong, and poetry writing have all played a central role in the unveiling, stabilizing, and expression of the non-dual understanding. Living in not knowing means to clearly understand that the conceptual mind will never be able to describe, define, or in any way grasp the pure awareness that is our essential nature. This gives rise to a kind of non-conceptual knowing, a clarity, confidence, and comfort that is indestructible. In her day-to-day living, Elizabeth endeavors to remain undistracted from and in ever new ways enjoy and appreciate this. So, Elizabeth, you said that as a young child you felt drawn towards exploring behind or beyond appearances. Were there any specific events in your outer or inner life that led you in that direction?
Mm-hmm. So the first memory that kind of comes up is actually witnessing or being present for the birth of my sister. So I was 3 years old at the time and have a distinct memory of when she lost the little stub of her umbilical cord. And there's a photo of me kind of sitting on a windowsill with her umbilical cord stub right there, and just had the sense of being really curious about that birthing transition. You know, one moment she's part of my mother, and the next moment somehow she's not. And this little cord, like, what is that cord that seemed to signify or facilitate that separation? So that's one memory that appears. Another, kind of at the other end of the spectrum, was 2 or 3 years later when I guess I was 6 or 7 years old, and a member of my father's congregation, so he was a Lutheran minister and had lots of farmers in his congregation, and the young child, the son of one farmer, was riding a tractor, and the tractor tumbled and pinned him underneath, and he died. And so I remember having a kind of at the other end of the spectrum a real fascination with, well, what happens when someone dies? Mm-hmm. So I remember kind of clipping out newspaper announcements of the death of this young boy and just being super curious about what happens when death occurs.
Mm. So it was a natural childhood curiosity. Mm-hmm. Why am I here? How did I get here? What is this world? How does it work? Mm-hmm. All of those sorts of things. I remember there were so many questions I couldn't ask an adult for fear of a sort of trivial, childish answer. Did you feel the same?
And then a couple of years later, my father passed away, and that was another encounter with the what happens after death questions. Oh,
That must have been quite traumatic because
yeah,
you were still a young child.
There's still a tenderness there, but it was also an initiation of sorts, because I have a very clear memory of at being at his wake, where everyone was kind of walking past the corpse, and I was standing at the back of the room, and at this very clear knowing that he is not that form, and actually had a sense of his subtle body kind of hovering near the ceiling. So that felt like just an initiation of sorts. But of course, it was all intermingled with the trauma, the psychological trauma of the young child. So, but that kind of deepened my curiosity.
And then that curiosity persisted into adulthood. You've explored a lot of different teachings and traditions. You mentioned Buddhism, Taoism, Advaita Vedanta in your bio, and you also referenced the Sufi tradition and maybe some others as well. What were you really looking for?
I guess I was following a thread that was perhaps initiated by those childhood experiences. Following a thread of like what's most deeply true. And I felt most interested in those types of explorations, though it didn't come immediately. I went through a period of so-called throwing the baby out with the bathwater, of rejecting conventional religious structures. But eventually found my way back through initially an undergraduate survey of religions class, and then studies in philosophy, and then deciding to no longer be on the academic path and finding myself at a Buddhist retreat. So that's the haiku version, if you will.
So it was a search for truth, really, primarily then. Because some people say it's happiness that they're looking for, or relief from suffering. But that doesn't seem to have been the trigger in your case.
It was a search for truth, though. I would say it was through yoga asana practice that a lot of this opened for me, and that was very much initially about wanting to relieve physical suffering. I had seriously injured myself playing basketball when I was a teenager. And that created a lot of physical discomfort. So I found myself in an Iyengar yoga class that was initially just about healing the body.
Yes, so relief of physical pain
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
suffering, really, yes, rather than anything
Mhm.
psychological. Mm.
Mhm.
So each of those teachings that you followed, um, I imagine each of them gave you something different. Was it like
Mm.
another piece of the jigsaw, or was it more that each one took you a little bit further in your understanding?
Mm. I would say each one showed me how, in essence, there's a meeting place between them. So, I mean, who knows why it is that Buddhism was the first path I encountered, and then Taoism, and then Advaita. That's the kind of the chronological unfolding, if you will. But I've always been fascinated by what they have in common.
Mhm.
Mm, and I find even the mystical aspects of, say, Christianity, mm, feel the same to me.
Mhm. So you were looking for commonality, were you, when you were
Mm,
studying
mhm,
those
mhm.
teachings? Yeah, yeah.
Though in the moment, say, of meeting Thich Nhat Hhan, who was my first spiritual teacher, mm, I mean, in the actual meeting, those sorts of questions dissolve, which, I mean, I was at that retreat because I had chosen to take a break from my academic studies, and because there's an inner knowing that there's something, there's got to be something more than what my mind was creating. So in that moment of meeting him, immediately there was a knowing that yes, something about his presence was what had been missing. Mm.
That's another dimension, really, the relationship with a teacher. There's
Mhm.
the first aspect was studying the teachings themselves, as
Mhm.
philosophy, I guess, um,
A little
and
bit, though the way it has happened at a number of points, especially early on, was that, I mean, I went to this retreat. I was having tea with a friend. She showed me a brochure of the retreat, and she said, "I think I need to go to this." And I opened it up, and I knew very little, almost nothing about Buddhism at that point. And I just said, "I think I need to go with you." And I mean, I was
Mm,
27, 28 years old. So my initial encounter was quite uh, free from conceptual overlay.
mhm.
I mean, the conceptual part of it kind of came later.
Right. Okay. Well, what did you feel you gained coming away from that retreat? You went back to your
Mm,
normal life.
mhm.
Mm,
Well, my initial sense after leaving the retreat was, oh my word, the entire world is different. And of
mhm.
course, the difference was some kind of shift that had happened, or an unveiling, or whatever you want to call it. So I actually didn't go back to my normal life. I changed directions pretty dramatically from an academic path to choosing to study Chinese medicine.
Right. Gosh.
So I moved from Madison, Wisconsin, where I was in a PhD program, to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to study Chinese medicine.
So what attracted you to that?
I felt, based upon at the retreat with Thich Nhat Hhan, there were some dream experiences and a lot of subtle body shifting that made me really curious about learning more about the subtle body. So I
Right.
came back from the retreat and a lot of energetic openings, shifts, kind of subtle realm access was happening. And so I felt that studying some form of subtle healing was a way to continue to explore and support that process.
Mhm. And did you go on to practice Chinese medicine after that?
I did for about 10 years,
Hmm.
though it never felt, the decision to study it felt absolutely in line with my
Hmm.
dharma, if you will, but
Mm.
practicing it never felt like a true vocation.
Mm.
So, I was happy to offer that. But after 10, 12 years, I was drawn just in another direction.
Right. So where did you go then?
I went in the direction of teaching more qigong, teaching more yoga asana, and starting to do writing, starting to write.
Hmm.
I had been writing poetry for a long
Hmm.
time, but started to write prose, essays, etc.
Hmm. Yeah. So is it that were there any important things in each of the teachings that that you studied that kind of remained with you and stayed with you while you went on when you went on to another teaching and
Mm,
carried on with your life and your life changed, your life progressed,
mm,
or was it that you left things behind? Um,
mm. No, I would say it's more of a weaving, continual weaving of particularly Buddhist, Taoist, and Advaita
mm,
teachings.
well,
There are certain practices that I've left behind. I've explored a lot of so-called progressive path type of practices that felt completely useful and relevant at the time that I've
yes.
now left behind because they've accomplished what they needed to accomplish.
Mm.
Mm, but every now and again, I'll go back to them if it feels useful or just enjoyable.
Well, what about the teachings themselves? Were there things
Mm,
that kind of stayed with you from each teaching?
mm,
For example, my background, my earliest background was with Ouspensky, and
mm,
one of the things that I continue to remember is his idea of multiple eyes. We are not one eye,
mm,
and
mm,
that still remains a useful concept. So that was something that I've kept, but most of the rest of Ouspensky, no, I haven't. So was it a bit like that for you? Were there things, for example, from Buddhism that you feel are important and you've kept, and but others that you've left?
Well, it feels hard to answer specifically because so much of Buddhism feels absolutely relevant to me. I mean, the kind of the equivalence of emptiness and dependent arising is something that the whole notion of mindfulness and the usefulness of learning how to rest or settle the body and the mind and the speech into their natural state. I mean, it just kind of. So, like, for instance, the mindfulness thing kind of gets a bit of a bad rap, like from the point of view of certain Advaita
It means so many different things, doesn't it?
Exactly, it's just defined in so many different ways. So, just that. So yeah, I mean, so much of Buddhism still feels alive.
What about Taoism?
For me, Taoism feels like it's somehow become the foundation in terms of moving through the world. The notion of Wu Wei, non-volitional action.
Right, yeah.
Kind of captures that paradox of phenomena appearing and how that can happen without losing stillness.
And Advaita Vedanta?
I don't feel like I can say anything about Advaita Vedanta. I mean, I'm fascinated by the connections between Advaita Vedanta and certain strains of Buddhism. I mean, the way Advaita speaks of awareness, the seemingly individual awareness, not truly being separate from universal, unlimited awareness. I mean, that kind of languaging doesn't tend to happen in most or many forms of Buddhism.
Yeah. Sometimes I've come across a statement or instruction or just a phrase in a book that I've read, which I don't understand. I didn't understand at the time, but somehow it kind of stayed with me. And I knew when I read it in some way that it was important, but just didn't understand it. And then many years later, I understood what it meant. Has there been anything like that for you?
But I want to know what the phrase was for you. I thought you were building up to telling me what it was.
There've been a number of them, but one of them is the title of this series of podcasts, which is "Live in Not Knowing, Free from Memory," which is a quote from Jean Klein. I read it in Jean Klein's book before I came to the direct path, and I didn't understand it at the time, and then later it's just meant more and more and more to me. And there have been some other ones as well. So I wondered whether there was anything for you that you'd kind of read early on, and somehow it stuck, but originally you didn't understand it.
Well, what's coming up actually is an entire book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is one of those books that I've read probably a half dozen times, and the first time I read it, it was probably like the summer after the Thich Nhat Hhan retreat. And then I put it away, and then I come back. It feels like every time I read it, there's a deeper level that resonates. So to me, that's interesting, and I feel super grateful for books like that.
Yeah.
It's interesting how certain texts just kind of have a capacity to meet the reader exactly where he or she is. I mean, maybe that's true for all texts, but this particular book, it feels like it's always an aha moment whenever I come back to it.
Yes. I suspect we're all different, maybe, and different different books. If I were to choose the whole book, then I would say Atma Darshan. I don't know whether you've read that one. But again, it doesn't appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah. And Rumi's poetry. But there's not really a specific phrase that's coming to me at the moment.
So your first teacher was Thich Nhat Hhan, and did you have any other teachers after that?
I mean, we share a teacher today in
Francis Lucille. Yes,
that feels like those feel like the kind of the bookends. So I've had probably. I mean, I don't feel inclined to try to list them by name because I don't want to leave anyone out. But I've probably had 15 or 20 people, some of them just a single meeting that felt significant, others attending retreats, others just sort of video connection.
Yes. So, there's a concept in Advaita Vedanta of an Upaguru and a Karana Guru. The probably know the Upaguru, a teacher who doesn't and perhaps can't take you all the way to an understanding of non-duality, but gives you what you need at the time. And the Karana Guru, who takes you the rest of the way there, and also throughout the process of stabilizing and establishing your understanding. I've heard Francis describe Krishnamurti as his Upa Guru, because he felt that he wasn't in a place where he could really understand non-duality at the time, but Krishnamurti gave him what he felt he needed. Was that the case with your early gurus, or is there one which you would say is your Karana guru?
Karuna, that's the kind of the final.
That's the one that takes you all the way there, but then stays with you. I think the concept is that once you find your Karana guru, you don't have other gurus after that.
Well, I would say in my connection with Francis, I've come to a place of feeling a kind of completeness. Now, whether that means that I won't ever have another teacher, I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? I've been in a position before of there was a particular teacher who was coming through Boulder, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, you must go see this person with me." And I'm like, you know what? I don't need another teacher. And she's like, "Oh, just come." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll come." And so I went, and this person ended up sort of blowing me away. I mean, it was a beautiful kind of, and I left, thanking her and saying, "Well, I guess I needed that encounter." So who knows what's going to happen?
Yes.
But I can say that Francis feels, I've asked my deepest questions to Francis and really appreciate the opportunity to pose questions. I haven't been asking many questions in recent years, but initially there were just tons, and his answers satisfied me. So
yes, yeah.
The stabilization piece feels the fact that he's European or American somehow has been useful, because some of the Buddhist teachers say that have a Tibetan or an Indian cultural context. I've sometimes been left feeling deeply satisfied by the teaching itself, but having questions about how to integrate it into my daily life.
Yes, absolutely.
So from an ultimate point of view, that it's irrelevant, of course, but in terms of actually integrating it into a life.
Well, there are practical things that arise, which sometimes you just need help. How do I approach this? From the point of view of the teaching, yes, or how do I understand it from the point of view of the teaching? And that can be very the culture within which you live can be very significant in that context. Yeah, there are quite a lot of some cases well-known teachers who never had a teacher themselves. They just had a sudden awakening. Do you feel it's possible to recognize one's true nature just from reading books or watching videos or doing practices, or do you feel a relationship with a living teacher is important?
Well, it seems to happen in all different kinds of ways. There are some, kind of well-known examples of seemingly spontaneous awakenings, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or Ramana, but
Yeah.
In my experience, just kind of what I've observed, it seems like a teacher is a really useful thing, a human teacher.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Certainly that's been true in my case.
Mhm.
So that's my experience. So in the
Mm.
moments of kind of unveiling or breaking through, or however you want to phrase that, I mean, awareness itself, being unconditioned, doesn't require anything,
Yeah.
but perhaps more in the stabilization process, someone who's walked that path and can offer useful guidance.
Yeah. Well, was there a specific moment, a glimpse when you suddenly recognize that you're not a body, mind, not a separate entity?
Hmm.
Or was it a gradual thing?
Hmm. Probably mostly a gradual thing, though at the Thich Nhat Hhan retreat, there were a couple of dream experiences that shifted things in a large way. I mean, I
Mm.
didn't have the conceptual understanding, but it felt as though a gateway were opened. I mean, for instance, I had a dream in which Thich Nhat Hhan was just opening his arms and inviting me to kind of jump into his arms for a big hug. So I leapt into his arms, and there was a complete dissolution of the two-ness,
Mm.
and just kind of this ecstatic. "Oh." Um, and then another dream, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, if you will. I heard a huge gong bell kind of sound, and in the experience itself, I I didn't feel like it was a dream. I thought there was just this massive sound, and I was trying to figure out, like, what was that? And in that moment, the only, like, where my mind went was someone has dropped an atomic bomb. I mean, that's where my mind went. And then there was another one even louder, and
Mhm.
I just prepared for my own death
Wow.
completely.
Mhm.
And then there was a third one even louder and just kind of reverberating through my body. And then I fell asleep. And the next morning, I asked my friend who had traveled with me, "Did you hear those bells? Like, did you hear those sounds?" And she's like,
Mhm.
"No."
Oh.
So, I mean, those experiences early on felt like, I mean, I wouldn't call it a sudden awakening, but I'd call it a clear opening kind of in the direction of that understanding,
Mhm.
kind of the not two-ness of the forms,
Mm.
and being willing, kind of facing the fear of death.
And perhaps showing you that you were on the right path, you were going in the right
Yeah.
direction. Yeah.
But I'd say there's this kind of interesting relationship between the direct experience and then learning how to talk about it, how to
Mm.
understand it, or mm, not understand it, or that's kind of been an ongoing thing for me because I very much enjoy using my conceptual mind,
Mhm.
and I very much enjoy not using my conceptual mind, and just kind of that dance.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Models can be
oftentimes,
very useful, can't they? Just
what can I'm
analogies,
sorry?
models, just
Mhm, mhm,
ways of describing things, or
mhm,
analogies.
mhm,
Um,
mhm. And poetry has been so useful just in terms of using language in a way that doesn't get congealed, doesn't get reified, kind of
yes. Yeah.
remains fluid.
Yeah. So you've said that poetry writing also contributes to the path that you're on. So you're
Mhm.
learning from the poetry you're writing.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Mhm.
How does that work?
Yeah. So I actually don't currently have a regular poetry writing practice, but I had a daily practice for probably 15 years.
Mm.
And the way it worked mostly was oh, feeling nostalgic for those days. Suddenly, I would go out in the morning, and I was kind of in a very devotional mood. So I would go out for a walk and perhaps be praying, either internally or externally, and then, but I would be kind of scanning the environment visually, and the way the seed of a poem would appear would be as something like an object or an event would just kind of pulse or shine in a way that told me this is the starting point for a poem. This is
Mm.
the entrance. So then I'd often get a phrase or a word or a line that kind of tuck that into that part of my mind. And then when I got
Mm.
back from my walk, I'd start the book.
Would you write the whole poem straight off, or would it
Pretty
come to you
much.
bit by bit?
Pretty much straight off, and
Mm.
sometimes I'd work through 2 or 3 revisions within an hour or 2.
Mm.
Mm, but and then I'd ask the question, "Who can I share this with?" And sometimes I would just send it off to 1 or 2 friends,
Mm. Right.
but very rarely would I come back to a poem later. It's very
Mhm.
much for the day.
Yeah. So poetry writing as a practice, I
Mm.
I've never come across
Mm.
that
Mm.
concept
Mm.
before.
Mhm.
Are there other practices that you did, or you still do?
Mm. Well, I've been practicing a form of yoga asana in recent times, yeah, just kind of for the health of the body.
Mhm.
Uh,
So you're doing it for physical health now, rather than for
yeah.
spiritual reasons. Is
Mm,
that right?
yeah.
Mainly.
I mean, I don't
Yeah.
feel. I notice that when my body is balanced and settled, then I mean that's just kind of a good thing for a lot of
Mm.
reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a health practice. I don't mm, the kind of the yogic path as a spiritual practice is not something I'm currently involved with. At least not directly.
Yeah. And qigong, do you still do qigong?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm.
Tends to be, again, it's almost like I've practiced quite a few forms, so now it's more particular type of practice will just feel right for the moment. So I'll do a
Mm.
qigong form or some yoga asana.
So it's just as
Mm.
you feel like it, rather than
Mhm, mhm.
something
Yeah,
regular that
yeah,
you
exactly.
would do. Well, what about meditation?
I don't just sit very often at all.
Mm.
I'd say, actually, oftentimes at the end of a yoga asana practice, like when I'm in shavasana,
Mm.
sometimes I'll let that continue on for a half hour or so.
Mm.
Kind
Mm.
of my favorite pose. But of
Yes.
course, it's, when it comes after a full asana practice where
Mm.
the pranas are balanced, then kind of just settle into being awareness and observing sensations, etc.
Yes. Yeah. Just allowing everything to
Mhm.
be as it is, as
Mhm.
Francis
Mhm. Mhm.
often says.
Mhm. Yeah. So, I
Mhm.
mean, the I'm just kind of thinking back to Francis's meditation practice, and yeah, similar. Similar.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, I have, maybe this is a bit of the Buddhist thing coming in. I have a bit of a commitment to maintaining some kind of clarity. So if I notice myself falling asleep, there's a hmm,
Mm.
and I try to become very relaxed without falling asleep all the time.
Yes. Mm. In many
But
occasions, when I've fallen asleep in Francis's
mhm, mhm,
meditations.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes, as he says, if that's what the body needs, then that's
Yes.
a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'd say my interest is in bringing the quality of meditation throughout the day. Mm.
Yes.
Or
The
just
idea that
taking brief moments, sometimes I'll just have a bit of a pause, take a few deep breaths, or sense of settling back if I become kind of involved in activity in a way that's creating tension, and I notice that. No, oh,
yes. Um, so the title of this set of podcasts is "Living in Not Knowing," and you said that what not knowing means to you is that the mind can never grasp our essential nature, and I certainly agree with that. But what does living in not knowing mean for you in a practical
mm,
sense?
hmm I'd say there's a quality of feeling as though the body mind is being lived by the movement of awareness. I mean, it becomes paradoxical because awareness has it's
Mm.
essentially still, but mm, so there's a sense of kind of comes back around to the Taoist notion of Wu Wei, the sense of movement that feels organic. And there's not the overlay of or the contraction of a separate me, kind of
Mm.
trying to be accomplishing that, or it's just movement that's free from the mistaken notion of a separate self.
Yeah.
And
I
of
mean,
course,
the universe is movement, isn't it? Everything we think is not moving is actually moving, and
there's the
it's
appearance of movement.
constant
Yeah.
flux.
Hmm.
So
And there are
yes,
relative distinctions, relative separations um, that are wise to attend to, but to kind of take it with a grain of salt, we could say, without losing sight of kind of the larger, more essential wholeness or unity.
mhm. It's on a practical level. How does it affect? How does living and not knowing affect your activities and your interests and your
Mm.
relationships, all the day-to-day
Mm.
type things?
Mhm.
What happens
Mhm.
every day?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, for instance, scheduling this podcast
Mhm.
just kind of felt right this time around in a way
Mhm.
that just in previous months it was like, oh, not quite, not quite. And then all of a sudden, ooh, there was just, I could feel, it just felt organic.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of relationships, I mean, just carrying the knowing of non-separation just
Mhm.
makes everything go more smoothly in my experience. Even the stuff that feels challenging, mm, there can be a spaciousness around it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, in terms of, I mean, I haven't been part of a, so to say, relationship with a capital R for a long time.
Mhm.
And for the most part, very content with that situation. So I can't speak directly to that form of connection. Um,
And what about difficulties and crises in your
mhm,
life and the way
mm,
you respond
mhm,
to those? What have been the
mhm,
changes there?
mhm. I don't. It's very unusual these days to kind of get lost in, kind of collapse into difficulty. Kind of feel
Mhm.
like I've lost myself in it. Mm, almost always the capacity to, remain as a witness to what's appearing in the realm of body or the mind or the world. Mm, and of course, the paradox is that that's simultaneously the deepest form of intimacy and the kind of opens a capacity to respond. It's kind of the deepest form of responsibility, the
Yeah.
capacity to respond. intelligently.
Mm.
So not always. I mean, every once in a while, like there's a got a bit of a contraction, but doesn't last long. And so I'd say, I mean, my life is not without its challenges for sure, but mostly I'd say there's a sense that maintaining this knowing just it kind of opens resources, a flow of resources to be skillful. Kind of the best way I know to describe it. Mhm.
I think that's a perfect description and a lovely way to end this podcast. Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank you.
lovely
Thank you.
talking with you,
Mhm.
and thank you everyone for listening.